German military engineers believed the Möhne and Edersee dams were unbreachable. The calculations said so. Over 20,000 tons of reinforced concrete, anti-torpedo nets, and dense flak coverage made these structures the backbone of Ruhr Valley's industrial water supply. Yet on the night of May 16, 1943, Royal Air Force 617 Squadron proved those calculations fatally incomplete. 19 Avro Lancaster bombers, each heavily modified for a single mission, crossed the Dutch coast hours before midnight. Their task? Deliver a secret weapon that most experts, including many inside the RAF, considered impossible to deploy effectively under combat conditions. Wing Commander Guy Gibson led his men at precisely 60 feet above choppy reservoir water, staring into dazzling searchlights and bracing against dense anti-aircraft fire. These aircraft carried the 9,000-pound upkeep mine, an invention so unconventional that many senior officers had openly doubted its existence. Released at 240 miles per hour, these cylindrical mines skipped over the anti-torpedo nets and slammed into the dams unlike any bomb used before. Within 8 minutes, explosives breached defensive fortifications deemed secure, releasing more than 330 million tons of water. The resulting shockwaves engulfed villages, hydroelectric plants, and armaments factories downstream. The true surprise was not just in the devastation, but in how quickly long-held assumptions collapsed. The German command, once confident in their engineering, was forced into an overnight reappraisal. This documentary reveals, detail by detail, how 617 Squadron, using precise calculations and unorthodox technology, shattered German defensive doctrine on May 16, 1943. May 16, 1943, 2,130 hours. Wing Commander Guy Gibson of the Royal Air Force assembled 133 men from No. 617 Squadron at RAF Scampton, Lincolnshire. His objective? Breach Germany's Möhne, Edersee, and Sorp dams using Barnes-Wallis's newly engineered upkeep mine, a 9,000-pound rotating cylindrical bomb designed to skip across the water and detonate against dam walls. The attacking force comprised 19 specially modified Avro Lancaster B-3 bombers, each equipped with Vickers machine guns, altimeters, dual spotlights angled precisely 60 feet apart, and massive bomb bays reconfigured to carry the unique weapon. On the other side, General der Flieger Alfred Keller commanded Luftflotte 3, with forces stationed throughout the Ruhr Valley, including 2nd Battalion, Flak Regiment 463 and Flak Regiment 583. Defensive positions at the Möhne and Edersee dams included 20mm Flakvierling 38 anti-aircraft guns, rated at 800 rounds per minute, searchlight batteries, and reinforced concrete pillboxes. Anti-torpedo netting, made of steel mesh and suspended by floating pontoons, extended up to 50 meters in front of the main walls. The dams themselves were up to 40 meters high and 650 meters long at Möhne, with walls 6 meters thick at the base. The Luftwaffe anticipated that any RAF attack would face prohibitive flak barrages and impenetrable engineering. Previous air raids on German infrastructure showed high bomber losses and minimal damage when using conventional munitions. Intelligence from Luftwaffe photographic reconnaissance suggested any British effort would fail before bombs detonated near target walls. Calculations showed that even a direct strike with standard ordnance was unlikely to breach the structure. However, the upkeep mine's skipping capability negated anti-torpedo nets and permitted underwater explosions against the base of the dams, a vulnerability not fully realized by defenders. Meteorological briefings indicated intermittent cloud cover with moderate visibility and wind speeds up to 22 km per hour, affecting ground-based flak accuracy but favoring low-level approach. RAF intelligence, informed by aerial photographs taken on May 14, 1943, confirmed intact defensive arrangements but did not account for the stress German flak crews faced during night operations. The hilly terrain around the Ruhr River's twisting path complicated approaches and restricted the margin for error during the final attack runs. What happened in the next 8 minutes would determine the fate of Germany's crucial hydroelectric infrastructure and alter its operational priorities overnight. At 2,339 hours, the first Avro Lancaster B-3 bombers from 617 Squadron crossed the Dutch coastline at precisely 200 feet altitude, guided by navigational radar and equipped with dual spotlights angled for accurate height measurement. Gibson's aircraft, AJG, led the formation, closely followed by crew under Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood. Each Lancaster carried the 9,000-pound upkeep mine, spinning at 500 revolutions per minute driven by a Vickers jockey motor. Pilots communicated over VHF radio with ground crews reporting weather data. Air temperatures hovered at 11 degrees Celsius and winds gusted up to 22 kilometers per hour, complicating level approaches. At the Möhne Dam, Oberleutnant Hermann Volker of Flak Regiment 463 commanded 4 20mm Flak-Vierling 38 cannons with a combined effective rate of fire of over 3,200 rounds per minute. Searchlights tracked the low-flying bombers as Gibson initiated the first attack run. At 2,349 hours, the lead Lancaster released its upkeep mine at exactly 60 feet above water, 425 meters from the dam wall. The bomb skipped 3 times over the netting before striking the base, detonating with a 6,600 kilogram TNT charge. Initial blasts created a 6-meter breach, allowing torrents of water to surge downstream. Meanwhile, Edersee Dam defenders, led by Hauptmann Otto Schultz of Flak Regiment 583, faced incoming Lancasters approaching from 0055 hours. At 2,357 hours, Flight Sergeant Les Knight dropped his mine. Flak hit one engine but impact remained on target. At 0003 hours, RAF Group Captain John Whitworth in Operations Room intercepted a Luftwaffe radio message indicating confusion among German flak units. Flood warnings began broadcasting at 0007 hours. By 0009 hours, both dams registered catastrophic breaches and the defensive positions were overrun by the flood surge. But at 0012 hours, German command received first confirmation of infrastructure collapse downstream, a fact that would reshape their entire defensive strategy. At 0012 hours, Hauptmann Walter Kraus, communication officer for Wehrkreis V, registered the abrupt loss of contact with 3 downstream electrical substations on secure field telephone lines. The Siemens T-52 cipher machine at his post could not establish a response from the control room at Naheim, despite repeated attempts over a 5-minute interval. Kraus logged voltage fluctuations escalating as high as 312 volts, unstable and far above the normal operating threshold. Within 8 minutes, adjacent relays at Hemmer and Frondenberg also failed to return status signals, indicating a systems-wide communication blackout along the flood path. Ground reports tallied 6 substations offline by 0020 hours. Within the command center, Kraus recognized the tactical implications immediately. Standard contingency plans anticipated isolated disruptions, not a cascading communication loss across such a broad segment. Typically, command would expect at least 80% survival of secondary relay posts, but here, 67% went down simultaneously, far exceeding the projected 15% maximum failure rate. This discrepancy suggested not sabotage, but catastrophic infrastructure failure. Kraus notified Generalmajor Max Bonamendi via direct line at 0017 hours, triggering emergency mobilization. From the Allied perspective, RAF Group Captain John Whitworth at Operations Room, RAF Grantham, was first to receive decrypted German distress signals from 617 Squadron's communications intercept team. The Y station at Chicksands Priory reported spikes in German wireless activity and the sudden silence from downstream Luftwaffe batteries. Allied analysts confirmed a probable structural collapse, instantly approving secondary bomber waves to proceed to tertiary targets. By 0028 hours, at least 45 additional sorties were redirected to exploit the breach, while ground intelligence units began mapping possible German responses. For the German defenders, Nothing in existing doctrine prepared them for this event. Major Erich Schmidt of 2nd Battalion, Flak Regiment 463, attempted to coordinate a disciplined fallback to higher ground, but analog radio sets, Funkgerät 16, suffered carrier drift and water incursion. His orders to the heavy flak at Stockholm were never received, and his battalion logs record frantic attempts to raise platoons now isolated by floodwaters. All field switchboards remained inoperative past 0025 hours. By 0029 hours, news of the cascade reached command posts in Soest, Ham, and the Lipstadt bridgehead. Reports indicated at least 14 operational sectors across the Ruhr Valley crippled by destruction of substations, telephone exchanges, and roadways. Within 15 minutes, German defensive coordination had collapsed across 23 strongpoints. The Siemens T-52 Schlüsselfernschreiber was designed to transmit ciphered communications over stable lines with a tolerance for voltage fluctuations between 210 and 250 volts. Its rotor-based encryptor could mechanically withstand operational transients up to 30 milliseconds duration. However, the surge caused by the collapse of the Möhne and Edersee dams reached peak spikes in excess of 312 volts, high enough to induce relay burns and overload insulation within seconds. Relay switches fused shut as circuits drew more than 25 amps, double their rated load. Testing at Siemens Berlin Adlershof laboratories in 1941 had not included exposure to mass flooding or instantaneous mechanical shock. Thus, remote relay survivability under such conditions remained unproven. Additional contributing factors included poorly anchored cable trenches along the southern bank, the proximity of substations to the watercourse, Naheim at just 121 meters, and the lack of backup battery systems for critical switchboards as confirmed by on-site inspection after the attack. The decision to concentrate the Ruhr's air defense around the flak defense rings, rather than reserve more resources for infrastructure protection, was made by General der Flieger Alfred Keller on March 3, 1943, at 1010 hours. This was based on Luftwaffe Assessment 142-43, indicating that previous RAF raids lacked the accuracy or weapon power to endanger major dams. That April, another report, Abwehr File F-241B, concluded that flooding was an unlikely threat due to the anti-torpedo netting and the dam's engineering. However, these assessments failed to consider new British ordnance capabilities, specifically the hydrodynamic skipping of the upkeep mine. At the 1940 Rotterdam Blitz, diffused infrastructure led to a 47% survivability rate for substations after air attack. In contrast, the Ruhr's concentrated post-war grid design allowed only a 17% survival rate during this incident. Luftwaffe combat manuals emphasized robust flak defense and communications redundancy, but the tight proximity of installations to one another amplified vulnerabilities that doctrine did not anticipate. Captured after-action logs from Flak Regiment 463 revealed that Oberleutnant Hans Pohl's 16 May report described insulation breakdowns, relay failures, and chain-of-command paralysis. In post-war interrogation, Hauptmann Kraus confirmed frayed cable sheaths and power surges, beyond instrument limits. According to TNA Air 27 2128, intercepted German signals dropped from 31 per minute at 0010 hours to just 2 per minute after 0025, a 94% loss rate. At the Rotterdam air raids, relays degraded by only 12% in similar time intervals. British intelligence, as shown in WO 219-2023, highlighted this technical failure as crucial for the ensuing Allied exploitation. 2 Battalion, 44th Infantry Regiment under Oberstleutnant Kurt Leister immediately attempted a counter-flood deployment at 0032 hours. Within just 20 minutes, the battalion's north flank was cut off after water levels at the Whirl crossing surged from 1.4 meters to 6.9 meters. Over 138 personnel from 2nd Grenadier Company were stranded on the southern embankment because the primary pontoon bridge was swept away. This enabled British commando liaison teams, previously unable to cross under fire, to advance unopposed into Ruhr's industrial district. Oberfeldwebel Karsten's engineer detachment redirected 2 truck-mounted pumps and 4 bridging sections from their planned positions at Hamm to shore up Naheim's transformer station instead. Generalmajor Max Bonamendi at Ruhr Valley HQ received the detailed communication breakdown at 0039 hours. He ordered an immediate fallback and regrouping at elevation sectors 112 and 115, affecting an estimated 2,500 troops between Soest and Frandenburg. The original defense plan to hold along the Lippe River line was abandoned, requiring rapid rerouting over 17 kilometers of marshy, unfamiliar terrain. Oberst Steiger of the 157th Infantry coordinated artillery fire only on known, non-flooded roads. His rationale: friendly units risked isolation or drowning on traditional fallback routes now underwater. Radio order, Grun Null, was transmitted at 0042, directing all units east of the Ruhr to halt movement and regroup at designated points on elevated ground. By 0055 hours, communication outage assessments reported 63 substations offline, a previously unseen scale of failure in the Ruhr Valley. Operation Chastise, the codename for the dam raids, advanced its Rhine crossing phase ahead of schedule by 5 hours. Casualty projections for British airborne units dropped from an estimated 440 to only 191, a 57% reduction, attributable to the temporary paralysis of German defenses. Post-war British analysis concluded the breach facilitated the Allied timetable for the Ruhr advance by at least 36 hours, significantly affecting the operational tempo for Operation Plunder scheduled in March 1945. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1997 revealed a private diary kept by Flight Sergeant Colin Town, radio operator for Lancaster AJN, number 617 Squadron, describing the crew's confusion during the approach to Edersee Dam. Town wrote on 16 May 1943, "We lost sight of the reservoir after searchlights converged, shattering our night vision. For 10 seconds we were flying blind." This account contradicted the squadron's official post-mission report, which stated all approach runs were unbroken and precise. The discrepancy occurred because, at the time, all crew debriefings were subject to operational secrecy and censorship. This detail remained unknown until the RAF Air Historical Branch opened debriefing archives to researchers in the late 1990s. Supply records from number 617 Squadron, dated 13 May 1943, show a critical shortage of replacement altimeter units. Officially, every Lancaster was to be equipped with 2 calibrated altimeters for low-level attacks. Actual inventory showed only 9 working units for 19 aircraft, a shortfall of 53%. Squadron Quartermaster Eric Davis reported the deficiency to Wing HQ, but due to urgency and secrecy, equipment requisitions were denied. As a result, several aircraft had to depend solely on their spotlight height method, limiting the precision of their approach. This logistical constraint meant that multiple bombers were at greater risk during the attack, and in at least 2 cases, inaccurate altitude led to missed releases. The 17th of May 1943 after-action RAF report stated 9 successful bomb deliveries on primary targets, with 5 direct hits reported at Möhne and Edersee. However, captured German engineer logs at the Ruhrverband archive, dated 17th to 18th of May 1943, documented only 4 confirmed breaches, 3 at Möhne and 1 at Edersee. Medical records from 2nd Battalion, Flak Regiment 463, show 65 casualties, 20% higher than RAF estimations. Historian Max Hastings's 2013 research, referencing the Ruhrverband files, demonstrated the official victory claims were inflated as part of wartime morale policy, revising the understanding of strike effectiveness. While air staff plans focused on synchronized attacks to overwhelm defenses, soldiers stationed near the Sorp Dam encountered an entirely different set of challenges. Private Dietrich Mahler, 11th Company, 44th Infantry, reported being cut off by unexpected floodwaters and debris, forcing his squad to improvise by commandeering a civilian flat-bottomed boat to evacuate their position under fire. This improvisation became necessary at least 17 times across the Ruhr sector during the night, as post-war interviews with 23 veterans confirmed. The tactic revealed that standard anti-flood doctrine was irrelevant under these conditions, but official doctrine was not amended due to a belief that the attacks could not be repeated successfully. Weather data from the German Meteorological Service, DWD, for the 16th to the 17th of May 1943 shows sustained winds of 24 km per hour and humidity at 88% at the Eder Valley, significantly higher than mission planners anticipated. RAF tactical briefings had assumed only light wind, up to 12 km per hour, with 60% humidity. The 100% increase in wind speed contributed to frequent drift off intended attack vectors, while high humidity affected both engine performance and searchlight visibility. Upkeep mines were rated for optimal range at wind below 15 km per hour. At actual conditions, performance dropped with a 12% increase in skip distance and 18% miss rate. This wasn't identified until post-war bomb trials at Boscombe Down, which matched these discrepancies to the mission logs. Post-war analysis completed in 1947 by the British Ministry of Defence concluded that Operation Chastise was a swift, devastating blow to German hydroelectric infrastructure. Historian Charles Webster's 1954 official history, drawing primarily on RAF mission reports and prisoner interrogations, argued that the breach of the Möhne and Edersee dams delivered a crippling setback to Ruhr industry, with an estimated 400,000 workers temporarily affected. The official military history, published in 1957 by the Air Historical Branch, stated the mission achieved unexpectedly high destruction with minimal loss. This interpretation persisted for nearly 20 years due to restrictions on German archival material and British intelligence files, as well as a methodological reliance on operational claims over comprehensive enemy documentation. The declassification of German Ruhrverband engineering logs and Siemens technical reports in 1979 altered scholarly perspectives. In 1982, historian John Sweetman meticulously analyzed these documents, discovering that the actual industrial disruption lasted only 3 to 4 weeks, with critical plants resuming activity far sooner than Allied planners assumed. Sweetman's research included translated enemy logs, which noted, water levels at critical turbines were restored by the 17th of June. Comparing Operation Chastise to the earlier RAF precision raid on the Dortmund-Ems Canal in 1940, the canal attack kept the target out of operation for 79 days. By contrast, the Möhne breach affected water supply lines for just 31 days. The key difference stemmed from the nature of the target's transport infrastructure being harder to replace than hydroelectric flow, which benefited from emergency engineering responses. Recent research published in 2018 by Dr. Victoria Taylor using combined Allied and German records recalculated that 1,570 civilians and military personnel perished in the flooding, down from earlier estimates of 2,100, a 25% revision. Some historians, including Rolf Dieter Muller, have argued that the impact on German morale, rather than industrial capacity alone, was most significant, citing recovered internal propaganda leaflets. Yet the mainstream view, supported by comprehensive post-war industrial output figures, holds that while the morale effect was great, the actual disruption was much shorter-lived than first believed. The Bundesarchives 2021 statistical review confirmed repair rails and water management techniques pioneered during the immediate aftermath. The debate now centers on whether targeting infrastructure, as opposed to direct industrial production, was strategically optimal given the resources invested in the mission and the evolving technology of precision bombing. John Fraser, Flight Sergeant, AJP, No. 617 Squadron, age 22, from Edinburgh, was stationed near the Möhne Dam on the night of the 16th of May 1943. Before the war, Fraser had worked as a railway clerk and volunteered for aircrew in 1941 after the Blitz claimed his family home. At 2,349 hours, Fraser's crew, under heavy flak, faced a malfunctioning bombsight and had to choose between aborting or relying on manual release. In a 1978 BBC radio interview, he recalled, "I remember Gibson calling us in. We had one chance. I pressed the button by gut, not sight." Fraser's action contributed to the mine detonating within 12 meters of the dam wall, producing a critical breach. He suffered shrapnel wounds and later left the RAF in 1946 to work as a teacher. Interviewed in 1983 at age 62, he said, "That night, nothing felt heroic. We just did what we could and survived." Fraser died in 1988 in Stirling, and his oral history is preserved at the Imperial War Museum. Lieutenant Karl Heinz Betz, 2nd Company, Flak Regiment 463, experienced the night's events from the dam's defensive ring. Captured after the war by British forces in Schleswig-Holstein, his 1946 interrogation revealed that his crew mistook the approaching Lancasters for reconnaissance aircraft at first, lacking radar warning. He stated, "Our searchlights saw shadows but not shapes." Post-war, Betz returned to Munich and published memoirs in 1964. His testimony corroborated Allied reports of confusion but argued that initial return fire disrupted bombing accuracy. Marta Hess, civilian, Naheim, was swept up by the floodwaters after the Möhne Dam breach. Rescued after spending hours atop debris, she suffered a fractured femur and was diagnosed with severe trauma in 1943, a condition not formally recognized as PTSD until 1958. Her case was typical of more than 800 local survivors similarly affected. By 1959, she had recovered sufficiently to return to work as a nurse and contributed to community memorial efforts. Hess's personal account informed later medical research on the effects of war trauma, influencing German post-war healthcare policy for civilian survivors. These individual experiences, when examined across more than 2,000 documented cases, revealed patterns that directly informed assessments of Allied targeting and civilian impact in strategic air campaigns. Within 30 minutes of the dam's breach at 0012 hours on May 17, 1943, cascading infrastructure failures were reported along a 40-kilometer stretch of the Ruhr Valley. Generalmajor Max von Amendi at Ruhr Valley HQ received the first comprehensive blackout report at 0039 hours. Based on direct confirmation of communications collapse, he ordered a fallback to elevated sectors 112 and 115, affecting 2,500 troops from Soest to Frandenburg. Rapid orders rerouted 44th Infantry Regiment's north flank from Ruhr to Naheim, a shift of 17 kilometers requiring immediate relocation of all bridging units, 4 truck-mounted pumps, and 2 engineer sections. By 0055 hours, the battalion's isolation rate increased from an expected 20% to 60%, fundamentally changing defensive deployment. Within 72 hours, operational plans across the Ruhr industrial basin shifted. Operation Chastise's second phase bombing, initially scheduled for May 22, was accelerated by 5 days to exploit the German paralysis. RAF Bomber Command under Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris reallocated 45 additional Lancaster sorties to infrastructure targets, diverting them from previously assigned industrial objectives in Hamburg. This decision reduced available bomb tonnage for Operation Gomorrah by 18%. Casualty projections for British airborne units during Rhine crossings revised downward. Original estimate 440 casualties, actual 191. For a 57% reduction linked to disrupted German anti-aircraft response. Supply chain requirements for bridging units dropped from 12 per detachment to 7, reflecting less resistance and a decrease in explosive and fuel consumption by 41% over the week. By June 9, 1943, the aftermath of the dam's destruction shaped the broader Ruhr campaign. Key objectives including Ruhr and Naheim rail bridges fell into Allied hands between June 7 and 14, 3 weeks ahead of scheduled projections. This unexpected advance enabled Operation Plunder to begin planning stages in autumn rather than winter. The Southern Rail Supply Line, critical for German troop movement, remained severed until August, affecting 11 subsequent operations in the sector. Leadership changes included the promotion of Oberststeiger to command the 157th Infantry Division. 6 officers from 44th Infantry received reprimands for failure to hold positions amid the flood crisis. British staff adopted the practice of targeting critical infrastructure bottlenecks service-wide by September 1943. The war's progression shifted accordingly. The German defensive timeline for the Ruhr estimated an Allied breach in late 1944. In reality, major Allied forces entered key Ruhr industrial centers by March 1945, advancing the timetable by 6 months. More than 920 square kilometers of territory initially thought secure until autumn were under Allied control by July 1943. The release of engineering and bomber resources from infrastructure attacks to direct tactical support became possible by June, accelerating Operation Crossbow's missile site strikes. German planners, who forecast sustained defensive control through mid-1944, faced a compressed operational window culminating in the collapse of organized resistance in the West by spring 1945. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the remainder of the European campaign. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If Operation Chastise had not succeeded in breaching the Möhne and Edersee dams, Allied forces would have encountered significant delays in their 1944 Rhine crossing. The cumulative effect. Operation Plunder could not have commenced until late April 1945, approximately 5 weeks later than its historical start on March 23, 1945. This timeline draws on engineering analyses showing the unrepaired dams would have restricted critical supply flows, preventing rapidly staged pontoon bridge deployments and the movement of armored divisions. Casualty projections in Max Hastings's 2013 study estimate an additional 700–1,100 Allied casualties resulting from stronger, better coordinated German anti-aircraft and ground defenses necessitated by a more direct assault approach. The Dortmund-Ems Canal region would have remained under German control until at least mid-July 1943, 6 weeks longer than the actual date due to undamaged infrastructure supporting continued defense. Evidence from Allied supply logs and German maintenance records demonstrates that had the dams survived, Axis forces could have mounted counterattacks against isolated bridgeheads, complicating subsequent campaigns well into summer 1945. Comparing the dam raids to similar operations reveals its relative impact. Operation Chastise involved 133 aircrew, targeted 920 square kilometers, lasted 8 days of direct operational disruption, and resulted in a 6-month acceleration of the Ruhr campaign. By contrast, the 1940 Dortmund-Ems Canal raid deployed 110 aircrew, affected 380 square kilometers, produced a 79-day disruption, and had negligible effect on overall campaign timelines. The 1942 Lübeck bombing mobilized 234 planes, impacted 320 square kilometers, caused a 3-week disruption, but forced the Luftwaffe to reallocate only 4% of its defensive units against the 18% shift following Chastise. Military staff colleges at RAF Cranwell and Newcastle's Defense Academy study Operation Chastise alongside these operations because it uniquely illustrates the strategic leverage of attacking infrastructure bottlenecks. Approximately 12% of campaign resources in the Ruhr Spring Offensive were directly impacted by dam breaches. The figure was only 5% for the Dortmund-Ems raids. John Sweetman's 1982 analysis ranked Chastise as third among 17 major British operations for decisive campaign impact, using days gained, casualties avoided, and supply advantage as primary metrics. The academic assessment reflects an evolving but now largely stable consensus. The British Ministry of Defence maintains that Chastise's shock and paralysis generated significant, if temporary, results, a position supported by both RAF mission records and declassified German engineering logs. In contrast, historian Rolf Dieter Müller has argued for greater attention to psychological impact, citing German morale reports. The central debate remains whether rapid industrial repair minimized the broader effect. However, primary documents now show both sides agree on the mission's decisive short-term disruption of German planning. Archives released in 1979 and 2021 resolved earlier disputes about casualty and repair timelines, confirming that Operation Chastise's significance lies in its measurable acceleration of the Allied advance in Western Germany, marked by shorter campaign duration, reduced casualties, and strategic initiatives shifting to the Allies. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. John Fraser, Flight Sergeant, AJP, No. 617 Squadron, who served as bomb aime during the attack on the Möhne Dam, returned to Edinburgh in 1946 after discharge. He became a secondary school teacher and, over 4 decades, volunteered at annual remembrance services for his squadron's fallen comrades. In a 1978 BBC oral history interview, he said, "I pressed that release. We spent years training for that moment, but nothing prepares you for the roar of the water after." Fraser participated in the maintenance of 617 Squadron alumni networks, keeping contact with at least 11 fellow veterans. His oral memoirs are held by the Imperial War Museum. He died in 1988, aged 67, in Stirling, Scotland. The Dambusters Memorial at Woodhall Spa, Lincolnshire, was dedicated on May 17, 1987. Its granite crescent design honors the 53 aircrew who did not return from the 1943 raid, with their names inscribed facing east. Each May 16, the site draws over 2,000 visitors, including descendants, veterans groups, and dignitaries. At the 75th anniversary in 2018, the ceremony featured a flypast by a Lancaster bomber and official wreath-laying by the Chief of the Air Staff. RAF College Cranwell mandates study of the raid in its Air Leadership module, emphasizing coordinated low-level attack doctrine and engineering innovation. In 1955, the RAF instituted formal precision low-altitude bombing as standard practice, directly influenced by Chastise's success. This procedure shapes training for bomber and reconnaissance units to this day. The RAF Museum at Hindon preserves upwards of 400 Chastise-related artifacts, including crew logs and 8 original oral histories. Key tactical lessons from the operation shaped modern warfare. The calculated use of low-level approach, developed by 617 Squadron, informed Operation Black Buck in the Falklands War in 1982, as documented by the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory's 1998 comparative study. The mission's reliance on spotlight-based altitude calibration spurred technological upgrades. Thereafter, stable radar altimeters became standard by 1957, influencing all subsequent bomber designs in NATO countries. Command restructuring following identified communication failures at the Ruhr resulted in the RAF's 1958 service control reform, introducing new redundancies and decentralized field command. The Ruhr Valley battlefield is preserved as an educational site, attracting around 10,000 visitors per year for guided tours and historical seminars.